Jonah Pike had always trusted wood. A good plank didn't lie. It groaned when it was old, split when it was weak, and held when it was true. As a cowboy, Jonah learned early that horses, weather, and men could betray you, but timber followed rules. That belief was why the sound woke him. Not the wind, not the coyotes. The house itself breathed. Jonah lay still in the dark, one calloused hand resting on the worn grip of the revolver beneath his pillow. The sound came again, slow, wet, almost thoughtful, like lungs, pulling in air through a narrow throat. It crept up from beneath the floorboards, rising through the mattress into his bones. Beside him, Edith slept. His wife took up most of the bed, her immense shape rising and falling in heavy, uneven waves. Edith had always slept hard. Too hard. Jonah used to joke that a stampede couldn't wake her. Tonight, he didn't smile. Her breathing didn't match the sound he heard. This was something else. Something lower, deeper. The house inhaled. Jonah swung his legs off the bed, boots kissing the floor with practiced silence. The boards felt warm. Too warm. He paused, pressing his palm flat against the planks. The heat pulsed faintly, like a distant heartbeat. The breathing stopped. Then came a knock. 3 sharp raps from below the floor. Jonah recoiled, hand flying to his revolver. The knock echoed again, directly beneath the bed. Edith stirred, muttering something thick and half-formed, but did not wake. "Who's there?" Jonah whispered, immediately hating himself for speaking. No answer. Instead, the board shifted. Not creaked, shifted, like something heavy rolling underneath them. Jonah backed toward the door, eyes locked on the floor. The lantern on the dresser flickered to life without being touched, its flame stretching unnaturally tall, casting warped shadows that bent toward the bed. The shadows moved wrong. Edith sat upright with a gasp, sweat shining on her face. "Jonah," she croaked, "why's the floor moving?" Before he could answer, the board split. A long crack raced across the room, stopping inches from Edith's dangling feet. From the gap came a smell Jonah knew too well, from cattle drives gone bad. Rot, iron, and something sweet underneath. A hand rose from the darkness. It was not human. The fingers were too many, knuckled wrong, skin stretched thin and pale as soaked parchment. The hand tapped once on the edge of the floor, testing it. Edith screamed. The lantern exploded, plunging the room into darkness. Jonah fired blindly, the gunshot deafening in the enclosed space. Something shrieked, high, furious, and withdrew. The floor snapped shut like a mouth biting down. Silence followed. Too much silence. Jonah struck a match with shaking fingers. The room was whole again. No crack, no hand, no smell. Just sweat-soaked sheets and Edith sobbing, clutching her nightgown to her chest. "You saw it," she whimpered. "Tell me you saw it." "I saw it," Jonah said. His voice felt borrowed. He helped her from the bed, his eyes never leaving the floor. When he reached the door, he noticed something carved into the wood near the threshold. Symbols he didn't recognize, worn smooth as if by years of passing feet. They hadn't been there yesterday. As they stepped into the hallway, the house exhaled, long, slow, satisfied. And far beneath them, something laughed, quietly enough that Jonah might have imagined it, if not for the way the walls trembled, as though the house itself was trying to hold the sound in. Whatever lived under Jonah Pike's home had finally noticed him. And it was awake. Morning came wrong. Sunlight should have spilled through the windows in long, dusty bands, warming the pine floors and stirring the smell of coffee and leather. Instead, the light that crept into Jonah Pike's house felt thin and gray, like it had been strained through dirty water. Even the birds were quiet. No sparrows on the eaves, no crows on the fence posts. The prairie outside held its breath. Jonah hadn't slept. He sat at the kitchen table with his revolver laid out in pieces before him, cleaning it for the third time since dawn. The oil smelled sharp and comforting, real, honest. Unlike the house, the boards beneath his boots still felt warm, still pulsed, faint as a memory. Across from him, Edith filled the chair like a collapsed hill, her great shoulders slumped forward, arms wrapped around herself. She hadn't changed out of her nightgown. Dark sweat stains bloomed under her arms and along her spine. Her eyes were red-rimmed, fixed on the floor, as if afraid it might open again. "It weren't a dream," she said for the 5th time. "I know," Jonah replied. She swallowed. "You hear it now." Jonah paused, listening. Beneath the ticking of the wall clock, beneath Edith's heavy breathing, there it was, soft, rhythmic, patient. "Yes," he said. Edith let out a broken sound that might have been a sob or a laugh. "Been hearing it for years." Jonah's hands froze. "What?" She flinched at the word, then sighed, her bulk sagging further into the chair. "Didn't think it mattered. Thought it was just the house settling, or my ears, or my weight pressing on the boards." Jonah stared at her. "Years?" She nodded slowly. "Since we moved in. Only at night. Only when you were gone driving cattle." She wiped her face with a trembling hand. "Sometimes I'd feel it shift under me, like the floor was making room." A cold understanding crawled up Jonah's spine. "You never told me," he said. "You never listen," Edith snapped, sudden heat flashing through her fear. "Not when it's about this place. You loved this house the second you saw it. Said it felt solid, safe." Jonah looked around the kitchen, at the thick beams, the heavy table, the walls that now seemed to lean inward, crowding the air. Safe. He reassembled the revolver and stood. "I'm going under the house." Edith's head snapped up. "No. Jonah, no. Whatever's down there is already here," he cut in, "and it knows us." As if summoned by his words, the clock stopped ticking. The silence that followed pressed hard against Jonah's ears. Then came a sound from the hallway, dragging, slow, wet, like something massive shifting its weight across the boards. Edith whimpered. "It's coming up." Jonah grabbed the lantern and moved toward the hall. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the house itself resisted him. The walls were closer now. He was sure of it. The hallway had narrowed, squeezing inward like a throat. Halfway down, he saw the door, the cellar door. Jonah stopped cold. They didn't have a cellar. At least, he'd never known they did. The door was old, its surface scarred by deep gouges that looked less like tool marks and more like clawing. The handle turned slowly on its own, wood creaking in a way that sounded painfully like relief. From the crack beneath the door came warm air, and a familiar breathing sound, deep and eager. Edith cried out behind him, "Jonah, it wants you." "It always wanted you. I just kept it fed." He turned slowly. "Fed it? How?" Edith's eyes glistened with tears, and something worse beneath them, guilt that had festered too long. "You ever wonder why folks stop passing by? Why no one ever stayed the night?" The door creaked wider. Something scraped against the steps below, climbing, and Jonah realized with sick certainty that the horrifying secret of his home wasn't buried beneath it. It was built into the marriage itself, and it was hungry again. Jonah didn't move. The cellar door yawned wider, its hinges sighing like tired lungs. The darkness beneath it wasn't empty. It shifted, layered and thick, as though something massive was rearranging itself to fit through a space too small. The breathing grew louder, wet and pleased. Behind Jonah, Edith wept. "I didn't know at first," she said, words tumbling over each other. "I swear it. First year, maybe two, it only asked for scraps. Bones, blood from the butcher, dead things already meant for the ground." Jonah tightened his grip on the lantern. His knuckles ached. "And then?" he asked. Edith's shadow loomed huge on the wall, warped by the lantern light. She looked monstrous like that. Too big, too soft. Her outline rippling as the walls themselves seemed to breathe along with her. "And then it learned my weight," she whispered. "Learned how hard it was for me to leave the house. Learned I was lonely." A thump came from below the cellar stairs. Something heavy settling. Testing. Jonah's jaw clenched. "What did you give it, Edith?" She sobbed once, sharp and animal. "People." The word hit him harder than a fist. "Drifters," she rushed on. "Men passing through. Folks already half gone. I never lured no children, Jonah. Never families." She looked up at him, desperate. "It talked to me. Not in words, feelings. Hungers. Promises. Said it'd keep you safe. Keep the land good. Said it needed bodies to stay asleep." The lantern flame guttered, bending toward the cellar like it was being pulled. Jonah laughed, a short, broken sound. "So every time I rode out, you fed my house a man." "It weren't your house then," she snapped, fear curdling into anger. "It was ours. And it protected us. Crops never failed. Cattle never sickened. You always came home." From below, something scraped its way up another step. Jonah backed away from the cellar door, each movement deliberate. His heel bumped Edith's foot. She was shaking so hard the floor shuddered beneath her bulk. "You said it wanted me," Jonah said quietly. Edith nodded, eyes wide. "Always did. But it said you were anchored. Said cowboys got roots deeper than they know. Hard to pull free." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Said I was easier." The scraping stopped. Silence pressed down, thick and expectant. Then the house spoke, not in words, through the wood. The walls bowed inward, beams creaking like joints stretching after a long sleep. Jonah felt it inside his chest, a pressure that made his heart stumble. A shape emerged in the cellar doorway. It didn't fit the world right. It was layered, flesh folded over flesh, pale and glistening, threaded with veins that pulsed like living ropes. Too many mouths opened and closed along its surface, each one lined with flat, grinding teeth. Arms, or suggestions of them, unfurled and braced against the doorframe, splintering wood as it hauled itself upward. The smell was unbearable now, rot, blood. Home. Edith screamed as one of the mouths turned toward her, stretching wide, lips peeling back in something like recognition, like affection. Jonah raised the revolver and fired. The shot struck wet flesh and vanished, swallowed whole. The thing shuddered, then laughed, a vibration that ran through the house, rattling dishes and shaking dust from the rafters. A voice bloomed inside Jonah's head. "Anchor," it crooned. "Stay." The floor surged. Boards buckled as the house shifted its weight, throwing Jonah to his knees. Edith cried out as the planks beneath her softened, sagged, like mud beneath a wagon wheel. Her legs sank ankle deep, then calf deep, the wood stretching around her like skin. "It's taken me!" she shrieked. "Jonah, help me!" Jonah scrambled toward her, grabbing her wrist. Her flesh was slick with sweat, impossibly heavy. The floor pulled harder, dragging her downward inch by inch. Cracks spiderwebbed outward from her body, revealing darkness and movement beneath. The thing leaned closer, mouths opening in anticipation. "She fed me," it purred. "Now I feed on her." Jonah strained, muscles screaming, boots sliding on the buckling boards. Edith clutched his arm, nails digging in, eyes wild. "Don't let it," she begged. "I did it for us." The floor gave another violent lurch. Something snapped. Jonah felt it then, deep, old, and final. The house had made its choice, and it wasn't him. As Edith screamed and the boards closed over her like a drowning mouth, Jonah realized the horrifying truth too late. The house didn't need to be fed anymore. It was ready to hunt. The floor closed, not with a crash, not even a sound, but with a slow, satisfied seal, like lips pressing together after a meal. Where Edith had been moments before, there was now only smooth, unbroken wood, darkened with sweat and Something else Jonah refused to name. Her scream cut off mid-breath. Jonah lay sprawled on the floor, arms outstretched, fingers clutching empty air. The warmth beneath the boards surged once, hard enough to rattle his teeth, then settled into a deep, steady thrum. Feeding finished. No, Jonah whispered. The house answered by relaxing. The walls eased back. The hallway widened. The oppressive pressure lifted, leaving behind a ringing emptiness that hurt worse than fear. Jonah pushed himself upright on shaking arms, staring at the place where his wife had vanished. His reflection stared back at him from the polished wood, wild-eyed, hollow, already a stranger. "Give her back," he said louder. The boards beneath him shifted, forming a shallow depression, like the imprint of a body that refused to fade. For a heartbeat, Jonah swore he saw the suggestion of Edith's shape still there, the curve of her hip, the breadth of her shoulders, pressed forever into the grain. Then it was gone. The breathing continued, slow, content. Jonah staggered to his feet and ran. He burst through the front door into gray daylight, sucking in cold air like a drowning man breaking the surface. The prairie stretched wide and empty before him, grass bending under a wind that smelled clean and real. He fell to his knees in the dirt, hands clawing at the ground. Behind him, the house loomed. It looked the same as it always had, solid, well-built, welcoming. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney. Curtains stirred gently in the windows, as if someone inside had just exhaled. Jonah vomited. When he could breathe again, he stood and backed away, never taking his eyes off the structure. He didn't stop until his boots hit the fence line. The land beyond shimmered strangely, like heat rising off stone. "Anchor," the house murmured, not aloud, inside him. Jonah clutched his chest as a sharp ache bloomed behind his ribs. His heart stuttered, then resumed its rhythm, too perfectly matched to the breathing beneath the floor. He felt it then, a pull, deep and subtle, tugging him back toward the porch. "Roots," Edith had said. He turned and ran for the barn. The doors flew open at his touch, revealing the familiar shapes of saddles, tools, and the old mule chewing placidly in its stall. Jonah slammed the doors shut behind him and slid the heavy beam into place. The barn smelled of hay and manure, comforting, honest. The breathing followed him. It wasn't loud here, but it was present, vibrating through the packed earth beneath his boots. The mule snorted nervously, ears flattening as it backed against the stall wall. Jonah grabbed a pitchfork and drove its tines into the ground. They sank too easily. The earth rippled. He yanked the fork free and stumbled back as the packed dirt softened, darkening, taking on the same warm, yielding quality as the house floor. Veins, thick as ropes, pulsed just beneath the surface, tracing paths that led unmistakably toward the house. It wasn't just the house, it was the land. "You spread," Jonah whispered. "You fed me well," the presence replied. "Now I grow." The barn groaned as its beams flexed. Nails squealed as boards warped inward, bending toward Jonah like a ribcage closing. He ran again, bursting out the side door just as the barn sighed and settled, reshaping itself into something subtly wrong. The fences around the property leaned inward now, posts tilting like bowed heads. The grass near the house lay flat, pressed down as if by an enormous invisible body, resting just beneath the soil. Jonah reached the open prairie and stopped. His chest burned, his legs shook, and still, the pull remained. He could feel the house behind him, patient and sure. It didn't chase, it didn't need to. It had eaten his wife. It had eaten strangers. And now it had tasted something else entirely, something harder, something rooted. Jonah Pike realized, with cold certainty, that the horrifying secret of his home wasn't what it consumed. It was what it kept. And no matter how far he ran, part of him was already buried beneath those breathing boards, waiting to be called back. Jonah made it 3 miles. He knew because the old cottonwood by the dry creek sat exactly that far from the house, its trunk split by lightning years ago, its branches clawing at the sky like a warning. He leaned against it now, chest heaving, sweat soaking through his shirt despite the cold air. Every breath felt borrowed. The pull had not weakened. If anything, it had grown more precise. It wasn't a simple dragging anymore. It tugged in small, intimate ways. Behind his eyes, in the soft places beneath his ribs, down the length of his spine. Jonah pressed a hand to his chest and felt something new beneath his skin, a subtle vibration that matched the rhythm he'd heard all night. The house was breathing through him. "No," he muttered, clawing at his shirt, at his flesh, as if he could dig the sensation out. His fingers found an old scar instead, the crescent-shaped mark just below his collarbone, left by a bull's horn years ago. It pulsed faintly, warm to the touch. Memory struck him hard. That night, Edith bandaging him. The house new to them then. Her voice soft, almost reverent when she'd said, "This place feels alive, Jonah. Like it knows us already." He retched again, dry this time. The ground beneath the cottonwood trembled, subtle but unmistakable. The creek bed exhaled dust as fine cracks crept across the dry mud, spreading outward in branching patterns that looked uncomfortably like veins. Jonah staggered back. "You didn't follow me," he said aloud, desperate. "You stayed there." "I am there," the presence answered gently. And here, pain lanced through Jonah's head. He dropped to one knee, palms slapping the dirt. Images flooded him. Visions not his own. Men stumbling toward the house at dusk, drawn by light and warmth. Edith's silhouette in the doorway, wide and welcoming. The floor opening, the mouths, the slow, grateful swallowing. And beneath it all, a deeper memory, not feeding, being built. Jonah gasped as he saw it. The house wasn't old, not really. The beams weren't cut from trees. They were shaped from something grown. The foundation hadn't been dug so much as exposed. The earth peeled back to reveal a mass already waiting there, waiting for a roof. "You ain't a house," Jonah whispered. "You're a body," the cottonwood groaned. Its roots tore free of the soil with a wet, sucking sound, writhing like severed limbs. Jonah scrambled away as the tree collapsed inward, its roots dragging themselves toward the distant shape of the house, sinking into the ground as they went. The land was returning itself. Jonah ran again, stumbling toward the distant line of hills where the property ended. Each step felt heavier, his boots sinking deeper into the soil as if the ground recognized him now, welcomed him. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, too loud, too synchronized. Then he felt it, a tightening, not around his ankle, not his wrist. Around his heart, Jonah cried out, collapsing face first into the dirt. He clawed forward, nails breaking, blood smearing the earth. Beneath him, the soil warmed eagerly, softening to meet his body. "Anchor," the presence crooned. "You hold me here." "I won't," Jonah gasped. "You'll starve." A pause. Then, something like amusement rippled through him. "I have eaten enough," it replied. "Now I only need you to stay." The pressure eased slightly, just enough for Jonah to breathe, just enough to make a promise. He lay there for a long time, shaking, staring at the sky until the gray clouds thinned and the sun burned through. When he finally pushed himself up, his legs trembled, but they held. The pull remained, but it had slackened. Jonah understood then, with a cold clarity that scared him more than the monster ever had. It didn't need to drag him back by force. It knew he'd come, because wherever he went, the land would follow. And sooner or later, a cowboy always returned home. Jonah woke at dusk with dirt in his mouth and blood under his nails. For a long moment, he didn't remember where he was, only that the ground beneath him felt aware. He pushed himself upright, spine screaming, and spat red-brown grit from his tongue. The cottonwood was gone. In its place lay a shallow depression in the earth, smooth and rounded, like something massive had rested there briefly before sinking away. The pull tugged again, gentler now, patient. Jonah staggered to his feet and looked down at himself. His shirt was torn open, caked with dirt and sweat. Beneath it, just over his heart, the old bullhorn scar had changed. It was wider. No, deeper. The flesh around it had darkened, puckered, the skin drawn inward like it was being slowly sucked into his chest. When Jonah pressed a trembling finger to it, pain flared, and something answered back. A faint throb, not his heartbeat, something else keeping time. "You branded me," he whispered. The land did not deny it. The sky burned red as the sun sank, bleeding color across the prairie. Jonah knew, with a certainty that felt implanted, that night would make everything worse. The house had always been strongest in the dark. The land listened better then. He couldn't outrun it. So he did the only thing a cornered man could do. He planned. Jonah limped toward the hills, staying just beyond the invisible line where the pull sharpened into pain. Every few steps, he felt resistance, like pushing against a current, but he forced himself onward. At the crest of the first hill, he stopped and turned back. From here, the house looked small, too small. The land around it bulged subtly, the grass lying in curved patterns that suggested ribs beneath the soil. The barn had shifted, its silhouette warped, no longer square. The fences had sunk almost entirely into the ground, only their tops visible, like the bones of something half-buried. The house was no longer pretending. Jonah swallowed hard and checked his gear. He had his revolver, half a box of shells, a coil of rope, and a canteen nearly empty. Not enough, not even close. But he had fire. He struck a match. The flame wavered violently, leaning toward the house like a compass needle finding north. Jonah crushed it out with his thumb, hissing as it burned him. "So that's it," he muttered. "You don't want me gone. You want me connected." A memory rose unbidden. Edith, sitting heavy at the table, her hands folded over her stomach. The way the floor had always dipped slightly beneath her chair. How she joked that the house liked her cooking. How it had held her. Guilt slammed into Jonah so hard he staggered. He sank to his knees, fists digging into the dirt. "I should have known," he whispered. "Should have listened." The ground warmed under his palms, comforting, encouraging. Jonah jerked his hands free like he'd touched a stove. "No," he snarled. "You don't get to soothe me." The presence stirred, curious now. Jonah rose, jaw set. "If I'm the anchor," he said aloud, voice shaking but firm, "then anchors can be pulled." Pain flared in his chest at the words, sharp and warning. He bit back a scream, forcing himself to stay upright. "I'll tear myself out of you if I have to." The land trembled. Not in anger, but in something closer to uncertainty. Night crept in, fast and cold. Stars pricked the sky like watchful eyes. Jonah turned away from the house and headed toward the hills again, deeper this time, each step an act of defiance that sent knives of pain through his ribs. Behind him, the house breathed. Not content. Not yet. It had never needed to rush before, and Jonah knew, felt, that as long as his heart kept time with its hidden rhythm, the thing beneath the boards would wait, learning how best to pull him home. By full dark, Jonah could no longer tell where the land ended and the house began. The hills should have broken the pull, should have blunted it, at least. But every step uphill felt like wading through deep water. His boots sank into soil that grew warmer the higher he climbed, heat seeping up through the leather, into his bones. Sweat ran cold down his spine. Behind him, something moved. Not the house, something else. Jonah stopped, heart hammering, and listened. At first, there was only the wind sighing through tall grass. Then came a sound he recognized too well from long nights on the range. Slow hooves, uneven, dragging slightly as if the animal walked on injured legs. But no horse breathed like that. He turned. The lantern light caught movement in the grass below the hill, shapes folding up out of the ground itself. A horse's silhouette rose first, its body half-formed, flesh translucent, like wet parchment stretched over ribs that shifted and rearranged themselves. Its legs bent the wrong way, joints popping softly as they locked into place. Then another. Then another. They pulled themselves free of the soil, tethered by long, veined cords that sank back into the earth, trailing toward the distant house like umbilical lines. Jonah's stomach dropped. "Riders," he whispered. The shapes on their backs straightened. Men, or what had once been men, sat astride the malformed horses. Their bodies were slumped, heads hanging low, but as Jonah watched, they lifted their faces toward him. Their eyes were gone, replaced by smooth stretches of skin. Their mouths opened slowly, jaws creaking, and they breathed, in perfect time with Jonah's heart. "You remember them," the presence said, almost fondly. Images slammed into Jonah's mind, drifters at the table, hands wrapped around tin cups, men warming themselves by the fire, men who'd never left, Edith's doing, and now, his problem. The riders nudged their horses forward. The ground rippled beneath their hooves, smoothing their path, lifting them uphill with unnatural ease. Jonah turned and ran, pain tearing through his chest as the mark beneath his skin burned white-hot. Each stride felt like it might rip his heart loose. The hills betrayed him. Paths he knew twisted subtly, leading him in wide, curving arcs that always bent back toward the house. Rocks shifted underfoot. Grass tangled around his ankles like grasping fingers. He fell hard, rolling down a slope and slamming into a shallow ravine. The riders halted at the edge, silhouettes stark against the starlight. One dismounted. It moved stiffly, joints creaking, as it climbed down toward Jonah. Up close, Jonah saw its face more clearly, features stretched thin, familiar in a way that made his throat close. "Caleb," Jonah croaked. The thing tilted its head. Caleb had been a drover, passed through 2 winters back, shared stories, shared whiskey, vanished. The thing that wore his shape opened its mouth. The sound that came out wasn't speech. It was invitation. A pressure in Jonah's chest, pulling, promising rest, relief, an end to running. The mark beneath Jonah's scar pulsed in response. He screamed and fired. The revolver bucked in his hand. The shot tore through the thing's shoulder, spraying dark fluid that steamed where it hit the ground. The creature reeled, but did not fall. The wound closed, flesh knitting itself together with wet, eager sounds. The riders leaned forward in unison. "You can't kill what I remember," the presence said gently. "They belong to me now." "As you will." Jonah scrambled backward, fingers finding a rock. He hurled it blindly, then another. Anything to keep distance between himself and the thing reaching for him with hands that had once shaken his own. "Stay back," he shouted. The creature paused. Not in fear. In confusion. Jonah felt it then, a flicker in the pull. A hesitation. The presence didn't command these things. It suggested. Jonah's mind raced. "You ain't my master," he growled, forcing himself upright despite the pain. "You're just land that learned how to eat." The ground trembled, harder this time. Anger, maybe, or warning. The riders shifted uneasily. Jonah backed deeper into the ravine, toward a narrow cleft where the rock walls pressed close. He squeezed into it, ignoring the pain as stones scraped skin. The riders tried to follow, but the earth didn't rise to meet them here. The rock resisted. The house couldn't shape everything. Jonah pressed himself flat against the stone, chest burning, heart pounding wildly out of rhythm now. For the first time since dawn, the pull weakened, just a little. Above him, the riders waited, patient. Jonah closed his eyes, breathing through the pain, and understood something vital. The land could remember faces. It could remember bodies, but it didn't understand refusal. And a cowboy who stopped running could still choose where to make his stand. Jonah stayed wedged in the cleft until his muscles trembled and his breath came out in shallow, ragged pulls. The rock pressed cold and unyielding against his back and chest. It didn't breathe. It didn't warm. It didn't answer him. For the first time since the night before, Jonah felt something close to relief. Above, the riders waited. He could hear them, hooves shifting, stone grinding under malformed weight. No impatience, no anger, just the quiet certainty of things that knew time would win for them. The presence brushed against Jonah's thoughts, cautious now. "You are hurting yourself," it murmured. "There is rest if you stop." Jonah laughed softly, a cracked sound. "That's the first honest thing you've said." Pain flared in his chest as the mark beneath his skin tightened, testing. Jonah gritted his teeth and pressed his forehead against the stone, grounding himself in its chill. "You don't own this," he said. "Not the hills, not the rock, and not me." The presence withdrew slightly, like a tide pulling back. Above, one of the riders shifted closer to the edge of the cleft, its head tilted, listening. Jonah held his breath, revolver raised, finger white on the trigger. The creature hesitated. Its horse pawed at the ground, uneasy. The veined cord tethering it to the earth stretched taut, vibrating faintly. Then, snap. The sound was sharp and wet. The cord recoiled into the ground, severed. The horse screamed, a thin, tearing sound, and collapsed inward, dissolving into loose soil and pale tissue that soaked into the earth like spilled milk. The rider toppled with it. Jonah stared in disbelief as the thing writhed on the ground, limbs flailing, its body losing cohesion without the tether. Flesh sloughed away in sheets. Within seconds, nothing remained but a dark smear on the stone. The other riders shifted back. Jonah's heart thundered, not in time with the house now, but wild and his own. The mark beneath his skin burned, then cooled, as if something had been forcibly unplugged. "So that's it," he whispered. "You gotta stay connected." The presence surged, suddenly sharp. "Do not—" Jonah shoved himself deeper into the cleft, ignoring the pain as rock tore skin. He pressed his chest hard against the stone until stars burst behind his eyes. The pull screamed in protest, the mark flaring hot, then faltering. The ground above shook as the riders retreated, dragged backward by cords that strained and snapped one by one. Each break sent a tremor through Jonah's chest, pain blooming and fading in erratic bursts. Finally, silence. Not the heavy, listening silence of the house. Real silence. Jonah slumped forward, shaking violently. Blood trickled from his chest, seeping through his torn shirt. The mark was raw now, angry and inflamed, but smaller, shallower. For the first time, it looked like a wound. He stayed there until dawn began to thin the darkness, until the stars faded and the sky paled. When he finally crawled out of the cleft, the hills looked ordinary. Scarred, maybe, disturbed, but not alive in the way they'd been before. Far in the distance, the house still stood. But it looked different now, smaller, and Jonah knew, deep in his bones, that something essential had been damaged, not killed, not even truly wounded, but made aware of resistance. He wiped blood from his mouth and turned his face fully toward the rising sun. "If you want me," he said hoarsely, voice carrying across the hills, "you'll have to come get me yourself." The land did not answer, and that frightened Jonah more than any whisper ever had. Jonah didn't return to the house. He circled it, from the hills, from the dry creek, from the far fence line where the prairie blurred into heat and distance. He moved slow, careful, every step measured, every breath watched. The pull was weaker now, but it was still there, like a hook left buried under the skin. The house watched him. He could feel it tracking his movement, not with eyes, but with pressure. Subtle shifts in the land, faint changes in the rhythm beneath his ribs. Each time he stopped, the presence brushed his thoughts, tentative, testing. It did not send riders again. That worried him. Near midday, Jonah found the first sign, a footprint, not a human one, not an animal's either. It was broad and misshapen, pressed deep into the dirt, as if whatever made it had weighed far more than it should. The edges of the print were smooth, almost melted, and the soil inside it was warm. The footprint pointed away from the house. Jonah's mouth went dry. "You learned," he whispered. The presence did not deny it. He followed the tracks at a distance, revolver in hand, every sense screaming. The prints led toward the low ground near the creek bed, the same place the cottonwood had been swallowed. As Jonah crested a small rise, he smelled it again. Rot. Iron. Home. Something stood in the creek. At first, Jonah thought it was a man bent over the mud, washing blood from his hands. Then it straightened. It had no tether. The thing wore a man's shape the way a coat wears a hanger. Too loose in some places, too tight in others. Its back was hunched, spine ridged beneath stretched skin. One arm was longer than the other, fingers brushing the ground as it moved. Its face turned toward Jonah. Edith's eyes stared back at him. Jonah staggered, bile rising in his throat. "No," he breathed. "You don't get to wear her." The thing smiled. Its mouth stretched wider than it should, lips splitting at the corners. When it spoke, the voice came out layered. Edith's low and familiar, braided with something deep and wet beneath it. "I made myself lighter," it said, "so I could walk." Jonah fired. The bullet punched through its shoulder, spinning it halfway around. The thing shrieked, not in pain but surprise, and dropped to one knee. Dark fluid spilled into the creek, steaming. But it didn't dissolve. It pushed itself back upright, flesh rearranging, closing. Slower than before, less certain. "You ain't supposed to be able to leave," Jonah snarled. The thing tilted its head, studying him. "You taught me," it replied. "You showed me where the stone resists, where the land ends." It took a step toward him. The ground did not rise to meet it. Each movement looked difficult, labored, as if gravity itself objected. Jonah felt the pull surge, but it was unfocused now, sloppy. "You're scared," he said, realizing it, even as he spoke. "You never needed to chase before." The thing hissed, sound bubbling up from too deep. "I need you close." Jonah backed away, leading it uphill, away from the soft earth. Every step burned, the mark on his chest screaming, but he forced himself onward, toward the rocks. "You want me," he said. "Then come where you can't hide." The thing followed. Behind them, the house exhaled hard enough to shake the land. Frustration, hunger, warning. But it did not stop its creation. Not anymore. Jonah reached the edge of the stone field and turned, revolver empty, chest heaving. The thing lurched toward him, slower now, pieces of itself sloughing off with every step. For the first time, Jonah saw it clearly. It wasn't a god. It was a body that had learned how to move, and bodies could be broken. As the thing raised its misshapen arm, Jonah smiled grimly. "Let's see how you do without the ground to hold you," and he ran, straight into the rocks, daring the house's first untethered child to follow. Jonah hit the stone field at a dead run. The rocks tore at his boots, sharp and unforgiving, ripping leather and skin alike. He welcomed the pain. It was clean, real. Every step farther from the soft, listening ground loosened the pressure in his chest, even as the mark beneath his skin burned, like it was being peeled open from the inside. Behind him, the thing screamed. Not Edith's voice this time, not fully. It came out broken, split by strain and rage, echoing strangely as it chased him into the rocks. Jonah risked a glance back and nearly stumbled. It was falling apart. Each step the thing took across stone cost it something. Chunks of flesh sloughed off, hitting the rocks with wet smacks. One of its legs bent wrong and did not straighten again. It dragged the limb behind it, leaving a dark smear that did not soak in. The stone rejected it. "You feel it now, don't you?" Jonah shouted, voice hoarse. "This ain't land you own." The thing lunged, fingers scraping rock, nails snapping. It missed Jonah by inches and crashed hard, ribs caving in with a sound like breaking kindling. It writhed, trying to push itself up, but the stone offered no help, no warmth, no memory. The presence howled inside Jonah's skull. Not words, pure fury. The mark beneath his scar flared, and Jonah dropped to one knee, gasping as something pulled. Not backward, downward. He screamed as the flesh around the mark split open. Something dark pushed against his skin from the inside, veined, wet, rooted. Jonah clawed at his chest, tearing fabric, fingers slick with blood. He felt it then with awful clarity. The anchor wasn't symbolic. It was physical. "You put yourself in me," he choked. "You grew inside me." The thing on the rocks convulsed violently, sensing the shift. It dragged itself closer, eyes locked on Jonah's chest, mouth opening impossibly wide. Together, the presence urged, whole again. Jonah laughed through the pain, a raw, feral sound. No. With shaking hands, he grabbed a jagged stone the size of his fist and pressed it against the bulge beneath his skin. The thing inside him recoiled, thrashing. Pain exploded through his body, white and blinding. "You want out," Jonah screamed. "Then you come out here." He drove the stone inward. The scream that followed came from everywhere at once. From the thing on the rocks, from the land far behind them, from Jonah's own throat, as something tore free. Dark tissue spilled onto the stone, steaming, writhing, already weakening without soil to hold it. The thing lunged one last time, desperate, and collapsed. Its body caved in on itself, flesh liquefying, spreading uselessly across the rocks until nothing remained but a foul stain and the echo of a hunger abruptly cut off. Silence fell hard. Jonah collapsed onto his back, chest heaving, blood soaking into stone that did not care. The mark was gone now, just torn flesh and pain, and a hole where something had been rooted. Far away the house screamed, not aloud. The land shuddered, then went still. Jonah lay there under the open sky, shaking, broken, alive. And for the first time since he'd laid eyes on that house, his heart beat alone. Jonah didn't know how long he lay there. Time felt loose now, unmoored. The sky shifted from hard blue to washed-out white, clouds drifting without purpose. Pain anchored him to the moment, sharp in his chest, dull in his limbs, real enough to prove he still belonged to himself. At last, he moved. Every inch hurt. He pressed a shaking hand to the ruined flesh over his heart. Blood had clotted, black and sticky, but the wound no longer pulled. There was no answering rhythm beneath it, no borrowed breath. The silence inside him was almost louder than the breathing had ever been. Jonah sat up and looked back toward the house. It was wrong. Not monstrous, hollow. From this distance it looked like a shed abandoned too long, its shape slumped, its lines sagging as though the weight it carried had finally become too much. The land around it no longer bulged. The grass stood upright again, uneven and scarred but free. Still, Jonah didn't trust it. He rose unsteadily and began the long walk back, staying on stone where he could, dirt only when he had to. With every step closer, he half expected the pull to return, to feel the land remember him and reach out again. It didn't. When he reached the fence line, he stopped. The posts lay flat now, rotted clean through at their bases, wood soft and stinking. The soil beneath them was cold, dead cold. Jonah nudged one with his boot and it crumbled to mulch. "Good," he muttered. The house loomed ahead, silent. No breathing, no warmth. Jonah approached with his revolver raised, though he knew it held no bullets. The porch creaked under his weight. Just old wood this time, no yielding, no pulse. He stepped inside. The air was stale. Dust hung thick and unmoving. The walls no longer leaned. Instead, they bowed outward slightly, like ribs after the organs had been torn free. The floor was solid. Where Edith had vanished, the boards were cracked now, split by deep fissures that exposed nothing beneath but dirt and rot. No mouths. No movement. Jonah knelt slowly and touched the wood. It was cold. He closed his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Not just to Edith, but to the house, to the land, to the dead men whose names he'd never truly learned. To himself. The house did not answer. As he stood, a sound reached him, faint, distant, but unmistakable. Hooves. Real ones. Jonah turned toward the window, heart jumping. On the far edge of the property, a rider passed along the old trail, heading west. The man did not look toward the house, did not slow, just passed by. Jonah laughed softly, a sound, halfway to a sob. For the first time in years, the house was just a house. But as he stepped back onto the porch, a final tremor ran through the floor, weak, dying, almost reflexive. From deep within the structure came a last, pitiful sound. Not hunger, not anger, fear. Jonah walked away without looking back. Behind him, the house sagged in on itself, beams collapsing, roof caving with a tired, dusty sigh. When it finally fell, it did so like an empty shell, revealing nothing beneath but earth, long since stripped of life. Jonah didn't stop walking. Some wounds never close clean, but some homes, once left behind, stay buried forever. Jonah thought it was over. That was the mistake. He'd gone a full day's walk west before the first sign appeared. The land had changed, felt flatter somehow, quieter. But Jonah took that as peace. He slept beneath open sky that night, wrapped in his coat, stars wheeling overhead without judgment. No breathing, no pull, just pain and exhaustion. He woke before dawn to the sound of flies. They buzzed low and angry, thick in the air near his boots. Jonah pushed himself upright, hand already going to the revolver out of habit, then froze. The ground around him was torn up, not rippled, not softened, dug. Long furrows carved through the soil, leading away from where he'd slept and back toward the distant horizon. The dirt was dark and wet, steaming faintly in the cold morning air. Something had crawled. Jonah stood slowly, every nerve screaming. He followed the marks a short distance, heart sinking with each step. Pieces lay scattered along the path, dark, leathery scraps of tissue that twitched when the flies touched them. Not dead. Trying to remember how to live. "You didn't all go with it," Jonah whispered. The presence was gone. He felt certain of that. The great, hungry will that had tied land and house together was finished. But bodies. Bodies lingered. The thing that had worn Edith's eyes had not been alone. It had been an experiment, a lesson learned too late. Jonah followed the trail until it reached a shallow ravine. There, half hidden, beneath scrub and stone, something lay curled in on itself, smaller than before, less sure, a torso, no legs, one arm dragging uselessly through the dirt, a face. Not Edith's this time, Caleb's. The mouth opened and closed soundlessly, lips cracked and blackened. When it saw Jonah, one cloudy eye rolled toward him. The thing made a thin, reedy sound. Pain without hunger, fear without command. Jonah raised the revolver. His hand shook. "You ain't her," he said, "and you ain't what you were." The thing twitched, fingers clawing weakly at the soil, trying to pull itself closer, not to Jonah, but to the ground itself. It pressed its cheek to the dirt like a man begging forgiveness. The earth did nothing. Stone lined this ravine. Cold. Dead. Jonah understood then. The house hadn't been the monster. It had been a womb. What crawled free now were miscarriages. He lowered the revolver and picked up a heavy rock. The thing let out a faint whimper. Not a threat. Not a lure. Just an ending. "I'm sorry," Jonah said, and meant it this time. He brought the rock down. Once. When it was over, Jonah buried what remained beneath stones, stacking them high and careful, like a marker. He did the same again before nightfall, and again the next morning. The farther west he traveled, the more he found. Failed shapes, half-formed remnants that had wandered blindly after the loss of the land's will, each one weaker than the last. By the third day, there were none. Jonah kept walking anyway, because some horrors don't chase you. They just wait to see if you'll stop. And Jonah Pike had learned too late and too well what happened when a man stayed too long in one place and called it home. Jonah reached the town at dusk. It squatted low against the horizon, a scatter of wooden buildings huddled together like they shared secrets. Smoke rose from chimneys. A bell clanged somewhere, steady, human, reassuring. Jonah felt a strange hesitation at the edge of it, like a man stepping into deep water after nearly drowning. He adjusted his coat to hide the bandaged ruin on his chest and walked in. Conversations slowed, then stopped. Eyes followed him down the main street. Too many, too focused. Jonah kept his stride even, boots striking dirt that did not answer back. He told himself that was good, normal. A woman outside the general store frowned. "You all right, mister?" Jonah opened his mouth to lie and froze. Her voice. Not Edith's, not Caleb's, but familiar. "I'm fine," he said finally. "Just passing through." She nodded, but her eyes lingered on his chest, on the way his hand hovered there, unconsciously. "We don't get many passers through anymore." Jonah forced a smile. "That's so." She glanced toward the edge of town, where the prairie stretched wide and empty. "Road's been quiet." He thanked her and moved on, pulse ticking faster. At the saloon, the air smelled of whiskey and sweat and old wood. Laughter rang sharp and sudden, then cut off as Jonah stepped inside. A man at the bar turned and went pale. "Jonah Pike?" Jonah stiffened. "Do I know you?" The man swallowed. "Name's Harris. I rode cattle with you. Years back. You disappeared." Jonah's mouth went dry. "Did I?" Harris nodded slowly, eyes never leaving Jonah's face. "You and your wife. Folks said you settled east, bought a house." His brow furrowed. "Funny thing, though. Anyone who went looking for you never came back." The room felt smaller. Jonah laughed lightly. "Sounds like a story that grew teeth." Harris didn't smile. Sheriff kept a list. Jonah felt it then, not a pull, a twitch, like scar tissue tightening. He backed toward the door. "I best be going." The saloon door creaked open behind him, too slowly. Jonah turned. The sheriff stood there, hat low, eyes sharp. He looked Jonah up and down, lingering on the chest. On the way, Jonah stood, like a man bracing for something unseen. "You Jonah Pike?" the sheriff asked. Jonah hesitated, half a second too long. That was enough. Hands moved, chairs scraped. Someone whispered, "I hear it too." Jonah felt a prickle along his spine. "Hear what?" No one answered. But beneath the floorboards of the saloon, old, worn, wooden, something creaked. Not breathing. Not yet. Just settling. Jonah bolted. He burst into the street as shouts rose behind him. The town blurred as he ran, heart hammering, scar burning like a coal pressed into his chest. He didn't stop until he hit open ground again, lungs on fire. He turned back once. The town sat quiet behind him, innocent as a sketch on paper. But Jonah knew better now. The thing he'd destroyed hadn't followed him, but the shape of it had. And wherever Jonah stayed too long, wherever wood gathered and people rooted and called it safety, something remembered how to begin again. Jonah didn't stop running until the town was a smear of lantern light behind him. He slept that night in a dry arroyo with his back against bare stone, revolver across his chest, eyes open to the stars. Every sound snapped him awake, the scuttle of insects, the whisper of wind through grass. But nothing breathed beneath him, nothing listened. Still, he did not sleep well. By morning the scar on his chest had tightened again, not pulling, remembering. Jonah stared down at it, jaw clenched. The wound was healing wrong. Thickened flesh, puckered edges. It didn't throb with hunger anymore. But sometimes, when he stayed still too long, he felt a faint echo, like a memory trying to decide whether it was real. "You don't get to grow back," he muttered. He walked west for weeks. He avoided towns when he could. When he couldn't, he never stayed more than a night. He slept outside, always on stone if it was available. He avoided wooden floors, porches, barns, anything that creaked too much, anything that felt like it might learn him if he lingered. Still, trouble followed. In one settlement, a cow was found half sunk into the ground behind a stable, its body twisted, soil warm beneath it. In another, a house collapsed overnight, beams folding inward like ribs. Jonah never saw the cause, but he felt the attention turn his way every time. Not hunger, curiosity. He began to understand the truth in slow, terrible pieces. The thing beneath his home hadn't been unique. It had been successful. Land learned, wood learned. And once something like that learned how to use a man, to wear him, to anchor itself through him, it didn't forget just because the source was destroyed. Jonah Pike had become a pattern. One night, months later, he stood on a ridge overlooking a new town, bigger than the last, rail line running through it. Fresh lumber stacked high near half-built homes. The place smelled like sap and ambition. Roots waiting to happen. Jonah's chest tightened, not in pain, but in warning. He turned away. That was when he heard it. A woman calling his name. Not Edith's voice. Young, clear, human. "Jonah, please." He froze. The voice came again, closer this time, full of fear. Jonah scanned the dark slope below him and saw her, a girl tangled in brush, ankle caught, lantern fallen and guttering beside her. She was real, breathing fast, crying. And behind her, far downslope, Jonah felt it, the faintest stirring in the land. Not awake, not yet, waiting to see what he'd do. Jonah swallowed. This was how it started. Not with monsters, with kindness. If he went down there, helped her, stayed, just a little too long, the ground might learn his weight again. The wood might remember his shape. The pattern might complete itself somewhere new. If he left, he stared at the girl, at the fear twisting her face, at the way the land beneath her had not yet softened. "I ain't your answer," he whispered. Then, louder, he shouted directions, clear, firm, telling her how to free herself, how to reach the road, how to keep moving. He stayed back, far from her, never stepping onto the soil near her feet. It took time, but she got free. She never saw him clearly, just a silhouette on the ridge, already backing away as she limped toward safety. When Jonah finally turned and walked into the dark, the land sighed, not in satisfaction, in disappointment. He kept walking, because Jonah Pike had learned the final horror too late to save himself, but not too late to stop it spreading. Some men are cursed to be roots, others learn, bleeding and alone, how to become wind. And Jonah chose to never, ever stay long enough to let the ground learn his name again. Years later, people told stories about a cowboy who never stayed. They said he came out of the West with dust in his beard and pain in his eyes, slept on stone when he could, and left before dawn without saying goodbye. He paid fare. He spoke little. He never crossed a wooden threshold unless forced, and when he did, he stood like the floor might open under him at any moment. They said trouble followed him, but never caught him. Jonah Pike aged on the road. His hair went gray, His stride stiffened, and the scar on his chest pulled tighter with every winter. It never healed right. It never fully hurt either. It simply reminded. On quiet nights when he stopped too long, he felt faint echoes, like breath remembered through thick walls. But nothing ever answered back. He learned the rules. Stone was safe. Moving water helped. Fire burned memories out of wood. And land only learned you if you let it. Jonah became careful, then disciplined, then relentless. He warned people when he could, in ways that didn't sound mad. He told them not to build too deep, not to stay when a house felt too warm, not to ignore sounds that came from below. Some listened, most didn't. Those who didn't, sometimes vanished. Jonah never went back to look. One winter, high in the mountains, Jonah felt the scar finally loosen. Not sharply, not violently, just a slow easing, like a knot giving way after years of strain. He sank down against a granite outcrop, snow falling soft around him, and laughed quietly through tears that froze on his beard. "Guess you finally let go," he whispered. There was no answer. When spring came, they found him there, peaceful, seated against the stone, revolver empty, boots worn through. No marks on the ground beneath him, no warmth, no wrongness. Just a man who had stopped moving, where nothing could grow. Years passed. Houses were built, towns expanded, land was claimed and named and settled again. But sometimes, very rarely, a floorboard would creak in a way that made no sense. Or a house would feel too heavy, too quiet, like it was listening. And someone, some drifter, some old rancher, some tired soul, would remember a story about a cowboy who never stayed. If they were smart, they would leave. Because the final truth Jonah Pike carried to his grave was this: evil didn't need to be alive. It only needed time, wait, and a man willing to call one place home. And as long as people kept settling, the land would always be patient enough to learn again.